There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles, Director of Partnerships here at Sweetfish Media. I am joined today by Don Bora. He is the co-founder of 8-Bit Studios. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's only Tuesday. I had to count the days, but I think I'm going to say it's been a good week so far.
Sometimes that just happens, trying to catch up with ourselves, figuring out what day it is, right? I love it, Don. Sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. We are going to dive into, I think, a hot topic, especially in the B2B tech space, and that's diversity, and especially what companies can do to tackle this issue and improve in this area, especially in the tech sector. And I know you've got 4 specific areas that you think a lot of companies can use and some practical takeaways to address their diversity concerns. Before we do that, Don, let's take a minute and have you introduce yourself. And I would love for you to share with the audience what you and the team at 8-Bit Studios are up to these days.
Yeah, sure. So again, my name is Don Bora, and I head up technology at 8-Bit Studios. I'm one of the co-founders. I've been doing technology in Chicago for about 30 years. So that 30 years spans pre-internet software development through internet, through online commerce, to mobile, to wearable devices. So I've seen a lot of different software development teams, types, companies, everything from huge companies to tiny companies. And I've had the chance to really kind of internally reflect since starting 8-Bit Studios about how I see gender playing a role and how I see diversity playing a role on teams. Mm-hmm. And I had a chance at 8-Bit since I get to run the tech team and I get to have influence on hiring decisions across the company to really push a diversity agenda because I believe, and it's actually supported. We can get into this a little bit in a minute, but you get more productive teams when you have a diverse group of people working on a product. So in a nutshell, that's kind of who I am. And at 8-Bit Studios, we have a really effective, diverse team of what we call pixel slingers. It's mostly user experience, design, software engineering, QA, project management, animators, the tight group of people kind of building software in a collaborative, GUI manner. So we just like to talk a lot and get a lot of work done and push a lot of product out the door and have a great time doing it. So we get noisy and fun. Yeah,
I love it. That sounds like a good combination there. I love that term, the pixel slingers on your team, Don. That's fabulous. And specifically in tackling this issue, I love what you said there and your experience in the tech sector. Yeah, obviously, well before the cloud. So I think your experience and years of it will lend itself to some wisdom for our listeners today. So let's start right there before we get into the specific things that companies and leaders can do. Talk to us a little bit about your perspective on the lack of diversity, specifically in the tech sector. And then I want to jump into these 4 ways that you feel a lot of companies can address that.
Yeah, I really started to think about it around the time when I was starting boot camp. And I co-founded a mobile boot camp here in Chicago. And really what struck me is the amount of male applicants we got. And it started me thinking about, well, all right, how do we get more women into these cohorts? And And I really started to think strategically about it when we did get some women in that just kind of blew all the guys in the cohort away. And that really started me reflecting on how all the women that I've worked with in my career and how good they've been. And then recently, studies have come out to support my inkling that I've always had that women on average are better than men at software development. So that really started me thinking about how can we solve this problem. And right around that time is when some of these things started to come out in the media about women having a significant pay gap in technology, there being a complete gap in hiring, women being hard to find in the industry. And I'd experienced that as well. So around, I guess, the first year that we'd started this boot camp, I had a woman in town who was running a shop pretty similar to 8-Bit Studios. She and I started talking, and we found out that we had this common passion about diversity and specifically about women in technology. So we founded a nonprofit that summer with the express goal of getting girls, high school girls, into technical internships in Chicago. And we bit off way more than we can chew, and didn't know we didn't know the regulation industry around, putting high school age students in companies of various sizes. We did place 7 students, 4 of them were girls, and it was very exciting. And I'm still in touch with 1 or 2 of them today. But that it started me thinking about the heart of the problem, which is that girls are generally, for different reasons, socialized out of technology if they're interested in it around 8th grade. So we took that boot camp and pivoted to a high school boot camp, and now we make high school curriculum. And one of the goals of that is to push this further down the chain into grade school, so that kids, and specifically girls, can get into this topic and get into it on its own terms and discover if they really want to be in there as that career is represented in real life and not the media necessarily. So they can kind of decide on their own terms if they want to stay in there. So for me, it's all about education, like getting kids that are really young, getting girls and getting them interested in the field, and then kind of like keeping them energized and going forward. So hope I answered your question there. I rambled a lot. So
well, that's great background to hear of not only, where you started thinking about this issue, but what you've done to get involved, especially, earlier on and at the education level. And I think that's a great segue. Some of those things, maybe, B2B companies right now aren't necessarily going to, get involved with each and every one of our listeners, but I think there are some things that they can do, starting with the hiring level. So I know one of the things you wanted to talk about, Don, was, interviewing tactics and unconscious bias when you're sourcing talent. So tell us a little bit about there, because I think that's a good segue from early years into looking at the candidate pool.
Yeah, so we started to borrow some of the tactics from there's a classical study and tactic used when sourcing musicians in classical orchestras, and they started to put the auditioners behind curtains so you couldn't see the gender or race of the person playing, and that increased the diversity. That alone increased the diversity. So we started to think about ways that we could kind of remove the bias from interviewing. Normally, when you're interviewing for a specific position, and you're trying to see if that person has a set of skills that's going to match that job. So what we try to do is we try to open that up a little bit. So we always interview, which means that we're always talking to developers, mostly young, mostly out of boot camps, that are just kind of getting their feet wet. And we're just talking to them constantly to find to track where they are in their skill set. And then when we have that skill set open up on our team, we usually have a pool of people that we've been talking to for a while to bring people in and see if they'd be a team fit for that. I hesitate to say culture fit because that's a little loaded these days, but a good fit for the team. Like, can the team work with this person? So that's kind of one of the ways we take bias out. We're not looking to match a skill. We're just seeing if we have a skill opening that matches that candidate. Then we started to standardize our interviewing techniques. So phone screens and in-person interviews are using a set of questions to normalize across the spectrum of developers coming in and what they're getting asked. So instead of like drilling down on one person or another specifically based on an ad hoc topic, we're starting with a template that gets used across the board to try to normalize the results we're getting back.
Today's growth story is all about search engine marketing. The company we're highlighting is SentinelOne. This challenger cybersecurity brand was set out to disrupt the endpoint protection space. Their brand was top-notch, their product was innovative, but they were struggling to gain traction online in an already developed industry. Then they found Directive Consulting, a B2B search marketing agency. Within the first quarter of working with Directive, SentinelOne was able to increase their organic traffic by 128% and overall lead volume by an outstanding 251%. Now, I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
So the next thing I know you wanted to talk about, Don, after interviewing, I think you have some real practical things there, is addressing the pay gap once you have folks in your organization. Tell us a little bit about some of the strategies that you think companies in the tech sector could use here to address their diversity and specifically the gender gap.
Yeah, so one of the things that we started to do, and I think this is a little bit of a result of boot camp education, is that we get a lot of people that know maybe one technology. So we'll get like a Rails developer in or an iOS developer in, and they'll pretty much stay with that for a couple of years, and then they'll start to branch out. So we do compensate differently based on the skills that they're bringing in and the number of years that they have in that skill. So if you're somebody coming in with 10 years of iOS experience versus somebody that's got 2 years of iOS experience, that's obviously going to be a differentiator. But once we have a crew in place, and we've had a crew in place for a number of years now, we started to do a broad compensation analysis, sourcing different statistical outlets to see where the industry is placing the developers of those certain number of years in service against developers in Chicago and New York and LA and San Francisco, and to kind of get a compensation analysis across the country. And then we bump that against our own developers to see like who's outstanding, who's not, who's outlier either way, like who's compensated really well or who's compensated lower than they should be. And then we use that to drive compensation changes at the end of the year. So this is our first year that we're doing that, and it's proven to be very eye-opening.
I love it. And again, just providing some structure to things that sometimes are a little bit more subjective. Doesn't sound like it takes a ton of brain damage, but just being kind of methodical about these things can actually yield some results. I love it. Yeah. So the next thing, Don, was your harassment policies and procedures, and actually putting those front and center oftentimes with your company values and how that can attract talent. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I know this seemed kind of intriguing to me as we were talking a little bit offline before we hit record here.
Yeah. So we, like a lot of young companies, we didn't have anything in place for a long time. And we realized that was going to be a problem. The more diverse culture we had, the more we had to make sure that certain people were aware of sensitivities, cultural sensitivities and gender sensitivities. So, we went for a long time without anything. And then we realized that not having anything could open us up to, of course, issues, especially in the wake of what we're seeing right now with the Me Too movement and some of the larger issues at larger companies. So we started to get ahead of that a little bit, and we with our employment engagement manager drafted a harassment policy that kind of mirrors our 8-bit culture, but also plays with government standards and kind of what everyone expects to see of a workplace. We have a zero tolerance policy. It's very clearly stated now, and it's one of the things that we can point to when we're sourcing talent, because it's a very hot topic right now. So if somebody comes to us and then somebody's going to a hot startup down the street, and there are literally like 10 of them just down the street from us, they're going to be looking at things like that. They're going to be looking like, is this a safe environment, or is this a place where I'm going to get, I'm going to have to deal with off-color humor or something that's going to make me uncomfortable.
I love it. Again, very, very practical, I think, as you kind of unpack it there, Don. The last thing I know you wanted to touch on was benefits and how those can actually, when you reframe them in certain ways, they can be more inclusive and help with your diversity efforts, which, are going to have benefits in growing your company. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts here.
Yeah. So when we started talking about our benefits packages, we started to think about vacation because that's where everyone starts to think about things. And we realized that, a standard vacation package would be, a number of weeks off here, a number of weeks off for sick, a number of weeks off for personal stuff. And we felt that it unfairly made people segment their lives into certain things. So while we do track it internally, if you're sick or if you've got life stuff going on, we basically just say internally vacation, sick, and life. And then our open vacation policy lets people pick and choose. Actually, just gives people the flexibility to say, for whatever reasons, I am not comfortable coming into work today, so I'm going to either work at home or take a sick day. And because we don't distinguish or penalize for that type of behavior, we end up having build a really tight trust network with our teams, and couple that with paying special attention to doing things that big companies have to do that we don't necessarily have to do. But being a young company, we saw a spike in 8-bit babies. So we constructed a room. We actually constructed a room specifically for nursing, and just kind of like getting ahead of what matters to our people, because where our company is almost 50% women, our leadership team is more than 50% women. So these are things that matter deeply to us, and we just try to get ahead of that. So I think our work from home policy and our leave policy can, with our facilities. And I did forget to mention that we also just recently crafted a family leave policy. Yeah. So if you're the primary parent, you're eligible for a pretty liberal family leave package, which I believe includes 6 weeks full paid and then 4 weeks half pay. Don't quote me on that because I think I'm misstating those numbers a little bit, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of that. And it is a comprehensive family leave. So, whoever's the primary caregiver can exercise that.
Yeah. Regardless of the detail, I think that's a phenomenal idea and probably is very attractive incentive to the right talent that you're looking to court. Don, as we said from the onset, years of experience in the tech sector and your specific focus and passion on this issue, I think have brought some great takeaways. We talked about addressing the pay gap, interviewing tactics, ways that you can put your policies and procedures on the front line, and adjusting your benefits. And all of those really can have some really great effects in increasing the diversity on your team, which can lead to great results. You guys at 8-Bit Studios have been recognized on the Inc. fastest growing list. And obviously, you've embraced a lot of these strategies. So I really appreciate you sharing a lot of this with our audience today, Don. If anyone listening to this would like to reach out to you, ask any follow-up questions, or just stay connected with you, what's the best way for them to reach out and go about doing that?
Yeah, so I guess one of the best ways to do that is to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm Don Bora on LinkedIn. I tweet very occasionally at @dbora, and the 8-Bit Instagram is always kind of a little fun to look at, and 8-Bit Studios is also on Facebook. So you can usually get a hold of me through any of those channels, and emailing info@8bitstudios.com will also get to me.
All right. Well, Don, again, thank you so much for bringing your wisdom to our listeners today. I really enjoyed the conversation.
All right. Thank you very much, Logan.
Digital marketing agencies have a tough job. You have to stay on top of the latest marketing strategies for your clients and your agency. What if there was a way you could address both at the same time? Imagine your agency putting out content with greater quality and quantity. Envision bringing your clients a turnkey solution for one of B2B marketing's fastest growing media strategies, podcasting. All those clients asking for your help with their account-based marketing efforts? Picture being the first to bring them the idea of content-based networking, showing them the proven strategy for breaking into their most coveted accounts. Here's the concept.
Sweetfish Media is looking to work with a limited number of innovative agencies interested in a new partnership model. We produce a podcast for your agency. You introduce the power of podcasting and Sweetfish services to your clients. Everybody wins. Learn more at sweetfishpartners.com.